Back at it again, baby, and we got another one with Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson. Let's dive in.
Speaking a moment ago about the sort of lack of meaning that people are looking for, particularly young men, and it really is a big thing that young men seem to have lost meaning. Postmodernism killed the scientific rationalist world, and the postmodernists have decided to substitute for that a certain utopian vision of the remolding of American society in terms of what they call equity, but really amounts to tribal dynamics. And you see this over and over, the radical left pushing its own version of utopianism. Classical liberals have been wrong-footed, I think, by the need for something more fulfilling, which is why classical liberalism always relied on an unspoken assumption that you were going to find meaning in your family, you were going to find meaning in religious community, you were going to find meaning in bettering your social life outside of government. But when that unspoken understanding just dissipated, when religion started to fall apart, all that was left was, well, let's just be rational with one another. There's not much inspiring there. And I think that's why you see that across the board, a drive toward irrationalism, a certain level of romanticism dominating the society to the point where irrationalism is much more prized than rationalism. If you make a rational point, if you cite data, very often this is now considered not only impolitic, but damaging and dangerous.
The other thing that ideology does,
that is pretty wild now. When you state facts, you're considered a hater or a ism or a phobe. And it's just like, wait, what? Since when did stating statistics or facts become a bad thing? I can recall a interview that we checked out with, I want to say it was Larry Elder and some host for TMZ. I believe that was the interview. And towards the end, the guy said, You're basing your opinion on statistics and not humanity. And I was just like, wait, what? What does that even mean? That's what we should base our thoughts on is statistics and facts. The logic behind that is just wild. It really does not make any sense. And yeah, it's crazy. You know, it's so crazy that it almost makes you feel like you're going insane. You know, I'm sitting there listening like, bro, am I the one that's insane right now? Like, what is happening? But anyway.
The radical left.
Dangerous.
The other thing that ideology does, and the radical leftists are also very good at this, is that it provides you with a convenient locale for the existence of evil. And so if you reflexively identify the patriarchy with evil, well, first of all, that's a powerful idea. It independent of its broad merit. It's true. Now, it's not the only truth, and it's not the complete truth, but it's true. The reason it's true is because every hierarchical system tends to degenerate in the direction of power. And all hierarchical systems are less than they could be. And that's partly because of the possibility that power and deceit will corrupt them, but also partly because we're willfully blind and deceitful in our own personal lives. And so when you tell young people that the cause of the trouble they see around them in the world, and maybe even the disquiet in their own heart, is the malevolent inadequacy of their society, that rings true. And they don't hear the rest of the story, you know, and it's the rest of the story that I've been trying to tell. They don't hear the story that, yeah, don't forget about the evil and corruption that exists in your own heart.
In yourself.
And don't forget about the fact that nature, this wondrous goddess as portrayed by the anti-human environmentalists, and by that I don't mean all environmentalists, by the way, that wonderful goddess nature is also trying to make you ill and kill you at all times. And so, but the story that corruption exists in hierarchical structure, and that's a consequence of malevolence, the malevolent use of power and deceit, that's true. So it's very motivating, especially if you're young and you're looking for an adventure. Now, it's also too convenient, which is one of its tremendous dangers, because unless you're taught to look within and identify the malevolence there as the primary moral obligation, then you now have an excuse and a moral justification to take out all of your negative emotion, your hostility, your resentment, everything about you that's unexamined on the demonic enemy. And of course, that degenerates with extraordinary rapidity, as we've seen over and over and over. So it's up to the centrists on both sides to deal with this. I've been talking to a lot of the optimist rationalist types on my podcast, Matt Ridley and Bjorn Lomborg and Haidt and Pinker, more distantly, but more recently, Lomborg and Ridley and Marian Tupy, who's written a lovely book on human progress, 10 things everyone needs to know about human progress. It's something like that, huh? Anyways, one of the things we discussed consistently was the difficulty in promoting the message that all three of these men are very aware of, which is that from a material perspective, in terms of absolute privation, worldwide, humanity is way better off on virtually every dimension you could possibly measure than ever. And most of that improvement has occurred in the last 40 years, and it's been revolutionary in its speed. And no one knows this. And so it's very important to try to think through why that is. Like, that's such a positive message.
Nobody knows that we live in could you imagine living like 100 years ago? Or even if you go back 500 years ago, could you imagine living during that time? Now, obviously, we wouldn't even know about the technologies that we have today. We wouldn't even know about cell phones. So that thought process wouldn't even really be there. So, we wouldn't necessarily miss cell phones because we wouldn't even know what they are. But how tough life had to have been 500 years ago in comparison to today. And I feel like that's where a lot of problems arise in today's society. It's become so cushiony. It's become so easy that we have to find different issues and troubles and tribulations to come up with because life is just so easy now. We can literally sit on our phones, press a few buttons, and somebody can bring us our groceries to our front door, or our take out food straight to our front door, and all we have to do is just press a few do pay, bang. We could hop on Amazon and order something, and it comes right to our front door. We don't have to go outside and actually chase down animals to eat. And I feel like that's part of today's problem. But you guys can let me know how you feel about it in the comment section.
Now, I talked to Russ, try to think through why that is. Like, that's such a positive message. Now, I talked to Russell Brand about this, and I'm bringing him up for a reason. He's a lefty by temperament and by heart. And his first objection, but he's very thoughtful and quick. His first objection, I pointed out all this data showing that by every possible objective measure, everything is way better than it was certainly 100 years ago, but certainly even 20 years ago, even on the environmental front in the main. And he said, well, what about disparity of distribution? So there's the problem of absolute level of wealth, let's say. That's improving. But there is still tremendous disparity. And of course, that is fair enough. You could even point out that the role of the left is to provide a conscientious voice for that's constantly attending to the fact of continuing disparity, regardless of absolute level of wealth. And fair enough, but
So, and I like that he pointed out that the left has a certain purpose, to make sure that disparity doesn't get too out of whack, and then all you have is just the elite of the elite and the peasants. I think once you get to that point, it's all going to the crapper, for lack of a better term. But you guys can let me know how you feel. Do you guys feel if there was just the elite, the rich, and then the poor? Do you guys feel like that society would work? I personally don't, but obviously this is just all off the top of the head. I haven't done any extensive research on it. Just in my mind, common sense tells me that isn't a society that would sustain itself or work in the long term. But let me know how you feel.
But having said all that, it's a great mystery that incremental optimism is not sufficiently motivating. And you can't just wish human nature is going to change. It's not going to change. We got to tell a better story. And I also think that's why I'm a target, I think, is because I am actually trying to tell a better story, and I'm actually having some success with it.
So I totally agree with that. And that really does bring us to the book, because one of the things that folks should know about all of your books is that they are very intimate, very personal. You talk about yourself, but you also speak in a way that most writers do not. You use second person pronouns. I mean, you speak directly to the reader. You say, you feel this way, you think this way. And a lot of people read that and say, I do think that way. This is a person who's speaking directly to me in a way that, mainstream political books very often do not. They consider me sort of a widget in whatever ideology they're pushing, or they're considering the value of systems or not systems. But you sort of end around that. And I think that in many ways, that's what members of the left find so threatening, is because if you're a member of the left and you believe that all individuals are essentially just the outgrowths of institutions, and therefore that all change by individuals is going to be insufficient, and that it must be societal change that creates individual change, you're a threat, because you're telling people, well, the systems can certainly get better, but the main threat to you is you. And that is a deeply threatening message to people. And if people find fulfillment in that message, then the left really does have a problem, because if people start improving their lives within the system and not blaming the system for their problems, and instead recognizing that they can improve their lives. That's what members of the left hate most of all. You talk about in the book, Jordan, the fact that people are constantly coming up to you and they're saying things like, I was leading a dissolute life. I read your book. I started taking.
Honestly, and you guys can let me know how you feel. Maybe I have a skewed perspective on the entire situation because of the videos that we've been checking out here. But I feel like the left has a need for poverty and people to feel like victims. In order for the left to exist, people have to need the system, so to speak, at least the current left in today's world. But you guys can let me know. Am I right in that thinking? Do you guys feel the same way? Why or why not? Talk to me in the comment section, please.
Your advice, and I've turned it around, and now I'm doing much better in life. And I'm blessed to have much the same experience from a lot of people who listen to the show, people who have been homeless, who now have graduated Harvard Law School, people who were single moms and then decided to take a college course and figure out their lives, people who have made mistakes and turned their mistakes around. And to me, those are inspirational stories. I think that because those inspirational stories exist, that I think is why people find you to be such a threat. It's because so many people are inspired by the stuff that you say and change their life individually without putting all of their ire and focus on a system that the left is mainly focused on tearing down.
I defy anyone to go read 10,000 comments on my YouTube channels and not come away with a much refreshed view of human nature. The comments are, in the main, unbelievably positive, and not in a naive sense. They're positive in a thoughtful sense and in a communal sense, because the people who are making comments on the lectures are also commenting on each other. And there's ideological babble on both sides. I would say that's probably 5% of the comments. And generally, I believe they're written by people who didn't actually watch the lecture, because they're often out of context. But in any case, 90.
I hate that. I see that all the time in my comment section, where somebody will comment something and I can tell that they didn't watch the entire video, or they heard one little bit of it and made a comment, because I'm like, wait, what? That's not even what I said. If you watch the entire video, even if I did say that, like, I corrected myself later on in the video, or that kind of situation. And it's always hard to correct it in the comment section, to make sure that you convey what you meant correctly in the comment section. So at a certain point, I'm just like, whatever, think what you want. I know that's not what I meant. Maybe somewhere down the line, I'll remember to correct it in another video. But yeah, that always sucks.
5% of the comments are thoughtful, but also extremely positive, which is very rare in a social media comment landscape, which tends to be very, very toxic. And so I think that's
really toxic. A lot of people will say things on social media that they would never, ever say in person. Keyboard warriors is what I like to call them. But anyway.
Absolutely great. And it certainly has that impact on me when I read it. But then here's something else that I've observed in the media attacks that have been directed towards me. They're not just directed towards me. First, they're directed to who they think I am. So that's kind of interesting to begin with. But more than directed to me, and more perniciously, is that they're directed to those who are hypothetically following me. Now, I don't regard myself as someone with followers. I regard myself as someone with viewers, listeners, and readers. And that's different. But in any case, my typical follower, so goes the story, is a disaffected.
That actually makes sense. The mindset is totally different. Instead of followers, you have listeners and viewers and readers. So they're not simply just following what you have to say.
Angry young white male. And for a while, I, in some sense, pushed back against that and said, well, my audience is about 70% male, but YouTube skews male, so that's perhaps part of the reason. And I see no evidence that it's particularly limited racially or ethnically, especially when I see my lecture crowds and when I meet people on the street. But then I started to realize that that was the wrong response. The right response is, why does it disturb you so much that there's a group of people who, by your own admission, are disaffected and angry and alienated and young, and I'm helping them? And why is that exactly a problem? What is it that I'm supposed to be doing with them? Just out of curiosity. What do you think? If you had your druthers, would I ignore them? Would no one talk to them? Is that actually what you want? Well, the answer seems quite clear, that that is exactly what's wanted. That's what's held forth, because there's this implicit assumption in all of this critique that in my very active aid, I'm doing something immoral enough to be parodied, let's say, as Red Skull. And so just what the hell's going on here? It's like, why is that now fodder for parody or slander? Precisely. I mean, do you debate the fact that I'm helping? Well, you go read the comments yourself and see what you think. And so then I thought about that a bunch too. I thought, well, what is it with men, the men that I'm speaking to, let's say, why are they responding positively? Why do they come to my lectures, the biblical lectures even, which is very surprising, right? Because what the hell are men doing at a biblical lecture, especially young men, especially when they could go do anything else and they have to pay for it? It's like, what are they doing coming to this lecture? Well, if the patriarchy is an evil tyranny, then the appropriate attitude towards any male ambition is to not treat it as ambition, but to treat it as nascent drive to tyrannical power, which is certainly what Foucault would recommend, for example, or Derrida, because it's all power. And so if you see some young man trying to stand up and better himself in any dimension, you're not going to trust that. You're going to identify that as the manifestation of tyrannical power. And clearly, if the patriarchy is a malevolent tyrant, then any sign of the desire to contribute to it should be, at minimum, not encouraged, but more subtly criticized and discouraged at every possible opportunity. And that's our culture.
So, I definitely believe Jordan Peterson was right. And one thing that I did like is that he acknowledged that at least one thought process on the left has a purpose, like it serves a good purpose. And then he offered, solutions to some of the issues that we have as a society. And I don't understand how anybody could truly hate this man. I haven't heard a single ounce of anything that would imply that he hates anyone or has any ill will towards anyone or any certain group of people. I believe he's just trying to help individuals. But like I said, you guys can let me know what you thought about this discussion in the comment section below. Like, share, comment, and of course, hit that subscribe button before you go. It's right up over there. Click that to subscribe. And right after you do that, check out that video too. You might like it. Peace and love. I'm out.